And so we'll move to the next speaker on our program, some local talent, Dr. Flavio Schenkel. Unfortunately, the climate is changing, and even if we can bend the curve, there will be adaptations and resilience needed, and Flavio's leading a team that's looking at genetic aspects of resilience and adaptability to the genetic resilience basis for adaptability to heat stress and climate change. So please join me in welcoming Flavio Schenkel, Professor and Director of the Center for Genetic Improvement of Livestock at University of Guelph.
No point?
As well, the green button will make a laser.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation for being a speaker here. Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here and show a little bit of our work trying to find heat-tolerant animals. And it is difficult to speak after the talk that we had. An excellent speaker and very clear presentation, really, really nice, inspiring. So I'll try to do my best here. And I'm going to reverse a little bit, and I'm going to start with acknowledgements. So I like to acknowledge these two people, Ivan Campos and Paige Rocket, because they are the students that they did all the work that I'm going to present. Ivan is right now at Cornell University and is going to present part of the work that he's doing right now as a continuation of what I'm going to present today. Basically, he's working with heat stress and the genetic tolerance to heat stress. And he used public weather stations to do this work. While Paige Rocket, she did similar work, but she used an alternate form of the weather data from NASA Power. And I'm going to talk more about this. So I'd like to acknowledge them. So what's heat stress? Heat stress basically is one imbalance between the heat gain and the heat loss in a given animal. So if the animal is getting more heat than it can dissipate or lose it, then you have a problem with heat stress. And heat stress has many consequences that I'm going to talk about. One is to decrease production. But also there are other consequences, for instance, in reproduction and lower feed intakes and other impacts. So the incidence and severity of heat stress depends on several things. It depends on the environmental factors that I listed some of there, like rainfall, temperature, humidity, wind speed, and of course the intensity, the frequency and duration of these factors. But in Canada, for the type of dairy production that you have, the main factors are temperature and humidity. Because the animals usually are protected from rainfall, wind speed, this will be more an issue, for instance, in New Zealand, where they are raised in pastures. Also, the intensity and severity of heat stress depends on herd factors, like the barn microclimate. And there are some barns that have, for instance, ventilation, fans, to control the heat stress. So our work so far, we did on average of all these types of barns, because we don't have a proper identification of the heat abatement in the barns. And also there are some individual factors like the breed that you are looking at, and the results that I'm going to show to you is basically Holstein, for Holstein breed. The potential production level of the animals, the diet and management, parity and stage of lactation, among others. The yellow ones are the ones that we can control better in our analysis. So all these factors, the environmental factors and herd and individual factors, needs to be accounted for when you do the analysis. So heat stress can result in many outcomes, or I say bad outcomes. The heat stress can reduce reproductive performance, decrease feed intake, decrease milk production, reduce immune response, and at a very extreme level can cause heat exhaustion and heat stroke, and also death. So what I'm going to present to you are results where you look at decreasing milk production. We are not going to talk about the other consequences of heat stress today. So I like to define heat stress tolerance, or initially the tolerance for any environmental factor. So tolerance to an environmental factor is the ability of the animal to maintain fitness regardless the stress imposed by that factor. In our case here, we are going to look at production. So the production will tell us the level of heat stress. So a heat tolerant cow would have a lower decline in milk production in response to the increasing heat load or the heat stress, compared to a cow that's more sensible or sensitive to heat stress. So that is our approach, is to look, of course, we have to have a measurement for the level of heat load or heat stress and see the impact in the production. So if you need the heat load to define heat stress, it's important to realize that in Canada, heat stress is a problem because we have sufficient heat load during the summer months to cause heat stress. So this is work done by Ivan Campos, was presented this year, where he looked at the heat load in different provinces in Canada, and I'm showing just two here, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec and British Columbia. And you can see that the graph there shows different colors. The darker the color is higher the heat load. And how we measure heat load here? Using an index that's called temperature and humidity index, THI. That's an index that aggregates two sorts of information: the temperature, the ambient temperature, and the humidity. And is heavily used in these studies that like to assess the heat stress. So you can see that Ontario they have a darker colors there, is because there are more heat load in Ontario during the summer. About 100 days in Ontario over the summer, you have some level of heat stress. Above a THI above 60 is almost for sure that you have already some level of heat stress. It depends on the trait that you are looking at, but that's is more or less a threshold. So in Quebec and Ontario, you see more heat load for more days, about 100 days. For Alberta and in British Columbia, between 50 and 75 days during the summer that you would have this high THI. So it is a problem, and this has consequences that I'm going to show you. So our first question when we start embarking this type of research was that if you could use the current data that you have available, for instance, from Lactanet for genetic evaluation, if you could demonstrate that heat stress was a problem in Canada. So what I did then, we used data provided by Lactanet, I want to explain to you that initially we used a subset of the herds because we are using weather station data to calculate the index, and that limited our number of herds. And later on we use another source of data NASA power, and then you could expand and use basically all herds that are milk recording in Canada. So the first approach, we adjusted the phenotypes for milk production, fat, and protein to the known environmental source of variation, things that we know that affect the traits environmentally. We adjusted, and then these adjusted phenotypes we regressed against THI, the heat load, to describe what happened with the production along the THI values. So what we are expecting is to try to define threshold values for the THI from where the production starts to decline, and this will be a sign of heat stress, some level of heat stress. So in that picture here shows what we are trying to do. We are trying to define this threshold here where you would have start having a decrease in production. When the animal is in the comfort zone, usually the production is stable, but when it hits that threshold, then the production starts to decline. So can we see this with the data? That was our question. So we have two published papers and two different researches that we did. The first one here was done by Ivan Campos. We looked just Quebec and Ontario initially, using weather station data to define the THI levels. And we use test day records, right? So we look at the THI value of the test day when it was measured, the production of the animal, in 2 days prior. So we use the average of 3 days, the day of the test, in 3 days prior to define the THI of that test day. In a SQL work, here we use, because we use weather station, we use just initially two provinces. In some herds, even in these two provinces, we miss it because we didn't have a weather station close enough to the herd to describe the environment. Then we moved to use the NASA power weather data. So now we could include all herds, don't miss herds, and we spent all regions of Canada. So the results that I'm showing here, hopefully, probably you don't see the numbers, but you see the shape of the curves. That's what's important. We look at the first, second, and third parities. We look at 5 different regions: Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia, the Atlantic Maritime provinces together, and the Prairies provinces together. And the plot is showing the behavior of the milk production adjusted to environmental effects against the THI level, or the burning of the THI value, or the temperature and humidity. For milk production, you can see there is 3 different thresholds, right? The second threshold is where the milk starts to decline, the production. But between the first and the second, there is an increase in milk production. So we're increasing THI, increasing milk production. So that was a puzzle to me. Before I talked to a physiologist and said, well, Flavio, this is expected because the cow is drinking more water to compensate the heat, and that's why it's producing more milk. But that doesn't mean that it's producing more solids, it's just water. Okay, so but here you can see that the milk production started to decline about 65, the THI, about that, for all parities and all regions in Canada. Then we look at the same for fat yield, and now you can see the fat yield. There has one threshold, start earlier, about 50, 55, start decline the production. Again, for all parities and for all regions. And protein yield. Now we have 2 thresholds, but the first threshold there is about 60 for all provinces and parities, you will start to see the decline in fat production, protein production. Okay, so we can look at the data. In Canada, we can see that there is a problem of heat stress with the summer, and that is the decline in production. This work was important for us too initially because we could now define which are the thresholds that we could use in the modeling, genetic modeling of these curves. And I put just one example here for the first lactation. You see some variability across regions, but, and of course between the traits, there are different thresholds, but the variability within the province is not large enough that we cannot use a single threshold. So, for instance, for first lactation, we define this threshold where the THI starts to affecting production. But then the next question was, how much heat stress costs, right? Is this really a problem in terms of costs? Then Ivan Campos, again, he did a calculation for Ontario and Quebec to estimate the economic impact of heat stress just on production. Just look at protein and fat, what the producers are paid, and we found out that it's about $34 million a year just for that reduction in the summer. So, and then if you know that we can assess the problem with the data that we have available, we know that this is costly. So what we can do? Can we try to develop a genetic evaluation to select for more resistant or tolerant cows to heat stress? If so, how we can do this and which weather data we could use? So why is the question of this weather data again? Of course, we can use the weather stations that are publicly available data to calculate the index, the THI index. And this is commonly done if you look at the literature. And why this is done? Because the weather station can provide an accurate proxy of the ground weather conditions at the dairy farm, if the weather station is close enough, let's say 20 kilometers apart. But the weather stations, they have some limitations, and I put several of them there. And the ones that are in blue, I think, are the most important. The weather stations, they use different recording methods and instruments. So this could cause some variability among the weather stations because of the different instruments and methods. Also, there is many daily gaps and yearly gaps on data in the weather station. It's not complete. And mainly, there is a lack of stations in rural areas in Canada. So there are many herds that we cannot do this analysis if you use the weather station, because they are too far from the closest weather station to represent the climate conditions at the farm level. So one alternative then was to use this called NASA Power weather data that provides estimates of weather parameters for any location in the world since 1981. In real time, you could look at today, at this minute, what are the conditions. And this project used a model that's called MERA2 model that integrates and optimizes data from multiple sources of information to define these atmospheric variables like temperature, humidity, and so on. So what are the benefits of this NASA Power data? You can have the weather data in any location, in any country, like in Canada, in any location in Canada. There is no missing measurements. And the parameters are estimated from using a similar assimilation model or the same model to estimate the parameters. So there is no difference between like the weather stations. So then we did some work to see how you could compare the weather station THI values with NASA-powered THI values. And you use different definitions of THI too, and the correlation between the estimates of about 0.95. So highly correlated, and also important that I didn't include here, there was no bias. So if you're comparing weather station THI and NASA THI, there is no bias, they are on the same scale, and they are highly correlated. So then that was important information, so we decided to continue using NASA power. So, but now we know that we have this weather data information that we can calculate our heating loads through the THI. But how you, and then we can use the whole country, all the information, all hertz, and we could then look at the evaluation for heat stress tolerance. There are different models that we can use for this, but we started using what's called reaction norm model. It's a model that describes the performance of individual across a range of environments. In our case here, the environment are the THI values. So for instance, with this model, you would have a graph like this, where you have the THI here, and here is the trait value, or it could be the breeding value of the animal, when the animal is in the comfort zone, and then when it hits a threshold for the heat stress, then the production starts to decline. So, and that's where you have the heat stress. So we have two segments, let's say, in this reaction norm model. And the slope of this curve here is one assessment of the tolerance. It gives you the tolerance of the level of tolerance. So this model also allows you to look at the genotype by environmental interaction, where the two animals or two genotypes respond differently to the environment of the THI values. So you could have two animals like this. The blue one that in the comfort zone is better than the red one, but then they change the rank. And the heat stress, the red one is a better animal. So using these reaction norm models, we look at the genetic parameters for the heat tolerance. And if it would be possible really to estimate EBVs, estimated breeding values for heat tolerance, and how to use it. So then we have this paper by Page Rocket, published in Journal of Science this year. We use here repeatability test day reaction norm animal model. It's a very complicated name. I'm not going to describe, I just put the model here. But simply is we are estimating the breeding value of animals in two parts. One when the animal is in the comfort zone, there is no heat stress, and after the threshold when you have the heat stress. And of course you account here for many environmental effects that we know that affect the trait. So, and we compared this reaction norm model with a traditional model where we don't fit the heat stress. We don't use information of the THI. So the ABV or of the animal will be constant across all levels of THI. Okay, so in terms of genetic parameters, what I like to show you here is that we estimate this for all lactations, but the results here is just for the first lactation as one example. So we have the traditional model, the parameters that we estimate when in the comfort zone of the reaction norm model under heat stress. And you have for the 5 regions of Canada, and for milk yield, fat yield, and protein yield. So this is a busy table, but I put overall here, I think, over all the regions, the results. You can see for the traditional model, for instance, the irritability estimated for milk yield was 16%. This is for single records, right? It's not for the lactation, so that's I expect irritability, really. It's for a testing record. Then you can see here for in the comfort zone, we have a 17% irritability, and for the heat stress, 21%. In this case, for milk, even increases irritability under heat stress. But for all traits, there was kind of a reasonable irritability for the heat stress compared to when you are in the comfort zone or with the traditional model. So it means that we have variability in that when the animals are under heat stress, we have a good genetic variability to select for. And one important information here that I'd like to show you, we calculate the genetic correlation between the overall level of production of the animal and the heat stress tolerance. And you can see here for all traits in all regions in Canada is a negative correlation. Moderate, low, moderate irritability, about here for milk minus 0.22 overall, about negative 0.3 for fat and protein. What this is telling us? That if we are selecting for higher production. So we expect that we are going to increase the sensitivity to heat stress. So the animals are going to be more sensitive to heat stress if you don't do anything. It's not a perfect correlation, like negative correlation. So this is telling us that there is a lot of animals that are highly productive and the daughters are not sensitive to heat stress or less, right? But overall, if you don't do anything, on average, animals that produce more, they are going to be more sensitive to heat stress. Another thing that probably Mike is wondering about is the ranking of bulls. What would happen with the ranking of bulls when we account for heat stress? So there's two different studies here. One by Ivan Campos, looking at Ontario and Quebec and weather stations. And the second one by Page Rocket, looking across Canada, using NASA Power weather data. So what I'm showing here is the re-ranking of EBVs for the top 100 bulls, based on when there is no heat stress. Okay. So for the two traits, and the numbers in the body of the table are the rank correlations. The correlation between the ranks when there is, for instance, here the animal is evaluating the comfort zone versus heat stress. That's the level of heat stress is 5 THI points above the threshold. The second column is 10 points above the threshold for heat stress. So more heat stress here than here. Okay? In compared when there is no heat stress. So you can see that there is some level of re-ranking, right? If there was no re-rank, this would be 1. But of course, there is much more re-ranking when you have a more heat stress. Like for milk, that's a substantial re-ranking. And even for protein, 0.71, we are going to observe serious re-ranking, and even for fat. In this other study that was using all provinces, here Page compared the traditional model, not account for any THI or heat stress, and with the comfort zone EBV from the reaction norm model, when the animals are not under heat stress. You can see that about 0.9, there is some re-ranking, but not substantial re-ranking. But when you look at the heat stress, and here if you look at the 15 points above the threshold, then you see much more re-ranking, especially for milk, but also for fat and protein. So some re-ranking is expected. if you really take into account the heat stress. So this figure here shows just visually what I'm talking about re-ranking. So this is for the top 10 animals. This is from, again, the work by Page Rocket. And you can see here's the DHI, right? We are increasing DHI, then we pass the threshold, and then you have how the different bulls will behave, or the daughters of the different bulls would behave, right? So here there is no change, it is a comfort zone, and then you have this different slopes, that's different tolerance of the daughters. Some bulls have daughters that are less tolerant to heat stress, so they're going to decrease more. Some bulls more tolerant. So there's just, and see, this is an interesting case here. There's this bull here is really good when there is no heat stress. Is even better the daughters when under the heat stress, because that correlation is not perfect. You expect that this could happen, and really this bull is a bull that is very interesting to look at. Okay, hopefully this helps to understand the modeling. So, and then another question is how to select bulls for heat tolerance. So, and I try to put some ideas that I have. If one day the industry decides to go move forward to have a genetic evaluation for heat stress, we could try to identify bulls whose daughters are heat tolerant to be used in any environment. So this bull would be like this, would be a flat line. It doesn't matter the level of heat stress, no heat stress, level of heat stress will be a flat line. Always the same level of genetic level, or in other words, that would reflecting the same level of production. So that's one thing, that's a great bull. We could identify bulls whose daughters perform relatively better under heat stress to be used in more challenging environments or regions, for instance, South Ontario, where the THI or the heat load is much higher during the summer. So then if you have two bulls like this bull in red might be the best one, because the daughters are less sensitive. They are more tolerant to heat stress if you are going to use in a region where is known to have a much higher heat load. And I think this is very important, identify bulls whose daughters perform the worst under heat stress to not be used in more challenging environments. Right? To prevent to use this bull, it could be a great bull where you don't have the challenge of the heat stress. It should be used, but you cannot use in another situation where you are going to, you know that summer will be challenging. I just like to show this slide because I didn't talk about other people that are spending time on this subject, and there are a lot of research going on now. Even in the United States recently, a good paper from the University of Georgia in heat stress, genetic evaluation of heat stress. In fact, genomic evaluation, they are already using genomic information because of the concern of this the reduced production during this summertime. But very recently, there is this October this year, this issue of Animal Frontiers that was dedicated to climate-adapted animals. And if you look at this, kind of the summary of this issue, I put these three bullets there, just to tell that this is a worldwide concern. So the climate change will continue to accelerate the negative impact of heat stress on ruminant livestock production. That's one takeaway. Mitigation strategies that would include modification of the housing, including heat extractor fans, water sprinkles, etc. In nutritional interventions are important short-term measures to reduce the negative impact of heat stress. So here I'm acknowledging that it's not genetics. There are other things that can be done. And also they conclude that climate smart breeding for thermal tolerance should be considered for a more sustainable livestock production system. So this is just to tell you that what we are doing here is part of like a community effort in other countries to investigate ways to select for heat tolerance. So, take-home messages. I think the first one that for me I was glad to have this result is that we can replace the weather station data by the NASA power weather estimates to calculate THI. And that increases largely the number of herds that we can include in the analysis. Not to be a subset of herds that are close to the weather station. That usually are closer to the cities, and not far in the rural areas. I think I demonstrate to you here that heat stress negatively impacts milk production of the Canadian hosts in all parties in all regions. There is no region that we don't have this impact. Continued selection for milk production may result in greater sensitivity to heat stress. If you don't do anything, that's what's going to happen. So the existing genetic variability makes it possible to select for heat-tolerant cows. And considerable re-ranking of top bulls is expected for production traits if you account for heat stress. So, to close, I'd like to acknowledge, of course, the data providers, especially Lactanet, and of course, this project that allows you to use is publicly available data, allows everybody to use the NASA Power project. And of course, the financial support, because we cannot do this without support from different agencies. So I'd like to support the Resilient Dairy and Genome Project and all the Genome Canada and all the agencies that are behind this project, because Ivan Campos is being paid by that project to continue his work. The Food from Thought project at the University of Guelph and the partners listed there. And the Dairy Cluster 3 that financed one of the projects that I supported Paige and Ivan for a certain period of time. So I think with this, I thank you again for the invitation, and I am open for questions.
Thank you, Flavio. Yeah, I think really drives home the importance that although there was frost on the pumpkin yesterday, heat stress is a meaningful challenge for our industry, especially here in Ontario. We've got time maybe for one or two short questions for Flavio.
Flavio, is it possible, like we did for feed efficiency and methane efficiency, can you configure a trait for heat tolerance that's independent of milk, fat, and protein?
Yeah, in our what we are doing now, we are using the traits to define the heat stress. So I don't see how this would be possible, right? Because the definition is already based on the traits. This is an open field because heat stress is not just affecting production traits; it's affecting reproduction. The only thing that you have to define better when happened the stress that would affect the reproduction. But once you do that, and there are papers showing, right? And then if heat stress also could have a epigenetic effect, right? So that the mother is subject to heat stress, and then it's going to affect the production of the daughter later on. So there's many aspects of this. But regarding to production, I don't see, because we are using production as our indicator where the heat stress started.
Okay, let's thank Flavio for some good information.